Okay, so yeah, I just wanted to give a little heads up. Next week, there's a couple things. If you have classes on campus, I don't know if anyone's taking, any of our classes, face-to-face classes. Tuesday is what's called a flex day. So that means that there's going to be meetings that are going to be going on all online, but they're all for faculty to attend. So that means students don't have class on Tuesdays of this week. So in case you have like an online class or something like that, I don't know what you might want to check with your individual instructor if they're meeting or doing anything like that. But on Tuesday is a flex day. So if it's a day you're supposed to be on campus, or if it's a day that, you know, maybe your teacher is usually available through email, you might want to double check just because a bunch of us are going to be in meetings that day. On that Monday, before Monday the 11th, I'm actually not going to be available for my office hours. So if you needed to meet with me during the week, I'll be available other days. I just won't be available that Monday or Tuesday. I don't know what your schedule is like, Chris, if you're available on Monday morning.
Next Monday? Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
I'll be available
okay,
on Monday. Yeah, absolutely.
cool. So if that was a time that works for your schedule and anyone wants to be able to meet with Chris, again, I won't be available, but Chris will. So you can either email me and I can schedule a different time to meet with anybody if anyone has any questions or wants to meet for an office hour. If not, Chris will also be available.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. Just contact me through my email and I'll be glad to set something up.
then do you want to talk up your workshop that you have this week
Yeah,
too?
so on Wednesday, I'm setting up another workshop just like I did for the last paper. And we're just going to be discussing the paper, any questions you have about it. If there's any work you want to come and share, that's a good place to come and do those things. I would super recommend you come join, especially if like you're still in the process of figuring out what you want to write about and you're still unsure of like how to get started on this paper. Come and we can talk and work things out. And I have actually set up my Zoom to have breakout rooms now because it wasn't working before last time. So if people want to work in small groups or they're working with the same prompt and they want to work together because of that, come by and we're just gonna have a space to kind of work on the essay together.
Awesome.
So that'll be Wednesday at 9 o'clock.
Cool. And then yeah, because for this week, the workload as far as what actually needs to be turned in is just the works cited page, so it's pretty light.
Yeah.
But the intention of that is that so you have time to work on putting this essay together, right? So it's at face value a pretty light week, but the reality is the reason I don't have a bunch of stuff for you to turn in over the next 2 weeks is because that work that you're doing is building the essay, and so Chris's workshop will be really helpful for that. So today I just want to talk about a couple things. This should be relatively short because I'm going to be talking about putting together a works cited page, and some of this should be review for the stuff that you're learning in LR10. But if there's any questions you have when I'm going through this, it's really straightforward. But again, it's kind of one of those things where like once you do it, you're like, oh, this is really easy, right? It's just kind of following like almost like a little bit of a plug and play, like put this exactly where it belongs, and I'll take you through some steps of doing a works cited page. And then the next thing that we'll talk about a little bit is developing concluding paragraphs for this next essay. And then definitely, if that's something that you want some more feedback on your individual conclusion, you can meet with one of us. Definitely attend Chris's workshop on Wednesday if you have the time available, and then you can get some feedback
find
on
the link
putting
for
a
that in the
conclusion together.
announcements.
Perfect. So let me share my screen and we'll take a look at this first part, which is talking about a works cited page. Okay, so your works cited page, this is going to be the thing that you're going to turn in this week, at the end of the week. And so the reason that I have you do the works cited is just like a little separate assignment is that because once it's done, if it's, you turned it in, right? I check it, make sure it's done in appropriate MLA format. And then if it is, then all you do is like literally just copy and paste this right onto the end of your essay, right? So the whole idea behind doing a works cited page is that you want to make sure that your reader knows where the sources that you're using in your essay are coming from, right? So this is going to be really helpful. Like works cited pages are a super helpful tool for you as a reader, especially when you're looking at your research project later on in the semester, because there might be a situation where you read an article or read an essay by somebody and they're using some sources to build their argument, and you could be like, oh, I really want to read those too, right? Like those could be helpful for me. I kind of think about it as like the to listen to the music that the bands that I like also listen to, right? So if I were to be like, I really like this band, what music do they listen to, right? Like what music do they recommend? And then I go back and I listen to that. And this is kind of the same idea of like, there could be an article, think about like, what research did a DJ do before she wrote The Danger of a Single Story, right? And if you could be able to look at a works cited page of hers and say, oh, here's the things that she read, to be able to inspire her to create the argument that she created, right? And that's the whole idea behind the works cited, is that you give your reader basically kind of a map of here's where you can find these sources that I read to build my argument. And so to be able to do that, it's pretty straightforward. It's literally just plugging something in exactly where it goes, right? And so we'll look at an example together. In this works cited page assignment overview that I have, there's a link that's embedded that takes you right to an area to guide you with MLA formatting. So if I click this link, you can see that it takes you to Purdue's OWL. Oh, hang on. Oh, it went away. Someone's like car alarm was going off next door at my neighbor's house. I was going to shut my window, but it's gone now. So it takes you right here to this Purdue OWL, and then it gives you a whole overview of a works cited page, right? So there's a bunch of really helpful resources in here, and you can kind of just scroll down and kind of look through here and see, how they're set up, what are the different entries, things like that. It's really important to know that like when it comes to writing a works cited page, that putting a works cited page together isn't something that you have to have memorized by any stretch of the imagination, right? Like instead, it's one of those things that it's just important to be able to know how to look up the ways of citing sources, right? It's just really as simple as like putting in the information for your book in the exact same format that it asks you to in MLA format, right? So I'll give you an example. So if I click over here, there's actually a sample paper that you can click in a sample works cited page. The sample paper is the same one that I linked to be able to see like how to put together the MLA heading. If I just click sample works cited page, it'll take me to a sample. And then you can see exactly how one is laid out. So this should be the last page of your essay, right? So after you're done writing your essay, the final page, not the page where your conclusion's on, but in another page, you'll title it works cited, and then you'll start putting in your entries. The entries for your works cited page should be organized alphabetically, right? So starting with the name, last name of the writer, and then moving on. Last name is going to be the first thing that you're going to be seeing, right? So you're going to be laying these out alphabetically. The next thing that you'll see when you're looking at the sample works cited page that's linked right to that link that I gave you is that there's no number one for the first entry, number two for the second entry, anything like that. The way that you know that the works cited moves from one entry to the next entry is the way that these citations are indented. These are what are called hanging indentations. So they're kind of like inverted versions of indentations. Usually at the beginning of a paragraph, we press tab and we used to seeing that paragraph indented over, right? In works cited, it's the opposite. So on the first part of the entry, right, at the beginning of the entry, it's not indented, it's over to the left. The second line and beyond is indented in a hanging indentation situation. So you can see like this first heading up here, right? This is the first entry, this Dean Cornelia in this sample works cited page. And see how the second line on here is indented, right where that New York Times article is. Then when it moves on to the next entry, it's not indented and the second line is indented. So sometimes entries will have more than one line, right? Like they'll be like 3 lines long, like this one right here, this from John Gowdy, this entry here. You can see the first line not indented, the second line and the third line are indented. So when you put your works cited together, even your sample works cited, you're going to have to do at least 2 sources, right? And then you're going to be practicing this, putting in these hanging indentations. So in your sample works cited, let's say you do Trevor Noah and Adichie. Adichie will come first, right? Because her last name comes first. You'll put her entry, you'll do the hanging indentations, and the next thing one will be Noah, Trevor, and you'll do that entry. Are there any questions about how this is actually organized or laid out as far as hanging indentations or alphabetizing the writers? Okay, so let's then take a look at how we actually do this. So over here, you can see that there's a section on the left-hand side for how to do MLA works cited. It gives you some options. There's like basic format, books, periodicals, electronic sources. So I'm going to click books, right? Because this is going to show me how to be able to cite a book. Specifically, how we're going to be citing basic book format, which is what we're going to use for both Blind Spot and for Trevor Noah's book, Born a Crime. So when I see this basic book format or a book with one author, it tells us exactly how to do it. You can see it says you're going to put the writer's last name, then a comma, then the first name, then the title of the book in italics, the city of publication, the publisher, and the publication date. And you can see that some places, if you see like between city of publication and publisher, there's a comma. Between publisher and publication date, there's a comma. After publication date, there's a period. You're literally going to copy it over exactly as it is here, but with the information that I provided for Blind Spot, for example. So this all seems like really small, like not that big of a deal. And I kind of believe that that's the way that it is. I don't think it's that big of a deal when it comes to MLA formatting. But the problem with MLA formatting is if it's not exact, then it's not in uniform. So I always think about MLA formatting in the same way that I think about like wearing a uniform to work, right? Like if you have to wear a really strict uniform, like I don't know, I've had jobs where I've had to use a uniform, wear a uniform before, and like sometimes that uniform can be really strict. Like my wife used to work in and out when we were in college, and like they would send people home if the color of their socks weren't black. Like if you wore blue socks or you wore white socks, then you could be sent home for not wearing the right color socks or whatever the color socks is they required to wear there. At the end of the day, it's not that important what color socks you're wearing. But if it's not identical, if it's not exact like the person next to you, then it's not a uniform. And that same idea goes for MLA format. At the end of the day, like if you miss the comma between the writer's, city of publication and the name of the publisher of the book, it's not a big deal. But it's technically not an MLA format if that's missing. So literally it's as simple as just copying it over exactly in the format that you see. So if we take this, and I'm just going to take this here and I'm going to copy it and I'm going to leave here. I'm going to go into our chat really quick. Let me just stop my share. And then you can see in the chat, I just posted the way it should be formatted, right? So we have the writer's last name, then there's a comma, then there's a first name and a period. Then we have the title of the book, the city of publication, right? A comma, the publisher, a comma, and the publication date. So if I were to do that exact same thing, if I go over into, let me go to Canvas really quick. Oh, wait, there we go. And you can see in the Canvas page that I had set up with the works cited section, there's all the information that you need for Blind Spot, right? So you have Blind Spot, the name of the writers, the name of the publication, city, all that stuff, right? So if I copy this, I'm going to put this right over here into the chat. Now we're going to say, here's everything that I need, right? I have the writers' names. I have the city of publication. I have the publisher. I have the year it was published, right? All that stuff is there. And so now I need to put this into MLA format, right? I need to take this information and plug it in the exact same format that it's there. So I need to do the writer's last names and first names. I need to do the title of the book, the city of publication, the publisher, and the publication date, right? And so it's really, really straightforward what I would do. So I'm just going to copy it over exactly as it is, right? So the first thing that I'm going to do is put the writer's last name, and I'm going to start with them alphabetically, right? So This is just a straight copying over. So take a second for it to pop up in the chat. Okay, so if you think about, right, this idea of like all you're doing is you're literally just copying it over, right? I'm taking this idea and I'm moving it directly over. What should be the first thing that I should put in here based off of the MLA format and the way that it's set up? What should be the first thing that I put
Both the
over?
author's last names.
That's right. So I'm gonna put both the author's last names. Right. Then what would come next?
Their first names.
Their first names, right? So I'm gonna do last name, first name, and then
The book title.
that's right. So after their first name, I put a period, and then the title of the book, right?
Oh, yeah, no, yeah.
And then after the title of the book, so I put
Um,
hidden bias, or I put the city of publication, right? So for city of publication, what would I put there based on the information that I gave you?
New York
There you
2016.
go. That's right. So it'd be just New York for city of publication. And then the publisher, published by,
Bantam Books.
there you go. Exactly. And
And
then a comma, and then the publication date, which would be 2016. And literally that's all there is to it. And then a period after 2016, right? So that's literally all you're doing is just this super kind of like, I always think about them like those little like paint by numbers, like paint color, number 4 is red, number 5 is green, or like the little dots that kids do like on the back of like menus at restaurants. It's literally like copy it over exactly as it is. There's also tools that you can use, and I'll show you an example. If we go to like AutoBib, like you've learned about these in LR10, right? And so let me grab the book number for Trevor Noah's book really quick. Here we go. Just grabbing the ISBN for a quick second. Because all we need is the book number, which you should have on the back of the book, or you could also like Google the book number and get the ISBN. So I'm just going to grab that. So now here's this website, right? These websites automatically generate works cited pages, and they're usually pretty helpful. So every once in a while they're off, but the only thing that I would say is copy and paste ever is that sometimes the font is different than the MLA font, like the 12-point Times New Roman font, right? So literally all I do is I have the book number, right? The ISBN or the name of the book number, which you'll see on the back of the book, right? So if I grab like my copy of Blind Spot off of my bookshelf, on the back of the book, right? Like you could see like right by a barcode, that's where the book number is for any book. So I just take that book number. Here I have the book number for Trevor Noah's book. I copy and paste it. I make sure it's clicked under MLA, and then I click Get Citations. And then you can see, let me just blow this up a little bit. There is an example of an MLA formatted entry for Trevor Noah's book.
Yeah.
It's like literally that simple. And I think that doing it this way, like using something like AutoBib, like in the past, like these weren't really that great, and they've gotten so good that it's like, now word processors, things like that will actually help you format works cited pages, and websites like this or EasyBib or things like that were linked in LR10 work super well. And so if you ever want to just like kind of check your work or just have this do it, you can do that. And then you can just copy and paste it right over into your essay.
Yeah. The only thing I'd say look out for is make sure that like sometimes it comes out as like bold, or like there's some weird things that are capitalized, like, but even that is usually pretty good a lot of the time. I think the biggest problem that you'll see is like sometimes if you don't have an ISB number, it'll let you just type in the name of a book. And if you do that, make sure that it's the right edition of the book that you're using. Because even for like Born a Crime, there's different versions of Born a Crime. Make sure that whatever citation is giving you is the right one for the book that you have.
I'm gonna put blind spot and show you how easy this comes out.
But yeah,
So I
don't
just
think
put
of
in
this as
the,
cheating. This is like
no, this is using
super,
a tool.
super
Yeah.
useful tool. Yeah.
It's like, I don't know, it's like me Googling, it's like me using a dictionary. Like
Yeah.
using a dictionary to see how to spell a word or Googling how to spell a word isn't cheating, right? It's just a tool that we use so we don't have to go about it the old fashioned way of like literally going through and copying exactly this. So here it is, right? Same exact thing that I was able to do. There's the information on blind spot, right? And then you could see that, like, to Chris's point, there's different versions, right? Like the one that I showed was published in New York. This version that's here is published by a different publishing company than the one that's right here, but it's not a huge deal, right? The thing that I would make sure that you're careful of is, like, you can see every once in a while it gets it a bit wrong, right? Like with the formatting, like for example, the subtitle "Hidden Biases of Good People," the H, the B, the G, and the P should all be capitalized, and they're not, right? So usually we capitalize the first letters of, all like words that aren't like prepositions or articles in titles. And so here that didn't happen, but that's just, an easy fix that when you copy and paste it, you just change it around. So every once in a while you might see like a little issue with capitalization or something like that. It's not perfect, but other than that, it looks great. Any questions at all about putting a works cited page together?
You said it's okay that we can just do it like this?
Sure, absolutely.
Nice. Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
I mean, it's like it's using a tool that's like that does a really, really good job. And I don't know, there's no reason to go about doing things like the super old fashioned way.
Yeah, no, that
And then
makes
the other thing that I'll show you is, like, when it comes to, my internet's running slow. What's it doing? There we go. When it comes to electronic sources, like to be able to look at how to cite like a YouTube video, like you would with, or how to cite a TED talk. So if you go to like works cited electronic sources, this will take you to all sorts of different ways of citing anything that's electronic. So you kind of scroll down, citing websites, department websites, ebooks, images, articles. And if you keep on scrolling, then eventually in here, we should be able to see how to cite a YouTube video. So you could use this for citing.
Danger of a single story.
Thank you. Yes, I was like, for citing, I was going to keep saying blind spot, but for citing a DJ's danger of a single story. So here's how you would do it. And you could see on here, right? It says the video and audio sources need to be documented for the same. So it just like the author's name is the same as the uploader, only cite it once, right? And then it gives you an example. There's the person who uploaded it. There's the name of it. Here's who uploaded it. So this would be like uploaded by Ted, when they uploaded it, and there's the link to the YouTube video. So literally, it's just all we do when we're doing works cited pages is we look up what is the source that we have, how do we put an MLA format, and then we copy it over exactly as it is. And I don't have any of this stuff memorized, right, at all, because there's no need to, right? Instead, what I do is I just use tools like University of Purdue's OWL, or behind me, I have like handbooks that show me how to put things in MLA format, or I use tools like AutoBib, and I literally, super simple, just copy it over exactly as it is. Any questions on putting together works cited?
Will we get dock points if we works cited wrong somehow?
Yeah, I mean, but never anything significant, right? Never anything like, I mean, that's why I have you doing like a little homework practice first to make sure that they're all cited okay. And then if they are, then you just copy and paste it over as is.
I will say, as a warning though, you might get professors at some point that will make a big deal about works cited pages. Like I have seen professors that'll straight up just be like, you need to take this back and redo this because you need to have like proper formatting. I mean, that's rare to be that strict, but it does happen. Like there are professors out there that'll be that strict.
What the heck? Those professors.
And it also depends on the situation of why you're doing the works cited, right? So like when you're writing your research paper at the end of the semester, like having a strong works cited is really important.
It's going to be important,
right? Because it's like it's showing that like here's the documentation that you've done, here's the way you put your research together, right? It's like, so it's like it's small compared to the body of what you did, but it's also giving credit to the people that you use to build your work, right? It'd be kind of like, I don't know, like for example, one of my friends has a really cool job and she does makeup for like TV and hair and movies and stuff like that. So there's a TV show called It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. It's like one of my favorite TV shows, but she's the lead makeup design at that show. And I
That's
remember like when
cool.
it's super cool. And when that show came out, well, she used to be, she was that way maybe for like the first 10 seasons of the show. But when that show first came out, I remember we were all hanging out over her house and we watched the pilot for the show. And then when it's over, we were all excited to see her name in the credits, right? Because her name pops up in the credits and we were sitting there, we're like, when they get to their kind of almost like their works cited of the TV show, if they would have messed up her name or forgot to put her name or spelled her name wrong, it would have been super disappointing, right? And it's kind of the same idea of like, if you're using sources in your paper and you don't include them or you put them in there incorrectly, when it comes to your research, think about like, let's imagine that like I'm writing a research paper and like somebody before me, like a colleague or somebody, you know, whose research that I really respect, that I've read a bunch of it, I've done a bunch of research and I've used them a bunch. And then when it comes time for me to cite them, I'm like, I leave them out. Or I forget to put them, you know, their name correctly or whatever the case is. It's like, but more importantly, one, on that point, you forget that person. But more importantly, when the time comes for you to do your research, right? When the time comes for you to say, I want to read these articles and I want to go through and read some of the stuff that the people who did the research read to build their research, if their works cited page is incorrect, you can't find the articles or you can't find the research that they did. And that can be really, really difficult and frustrating, right? So the idea is you want to make sure that like just your works cited is in MLA format, because Chris is right. You are going to run across those teachers who want something in perfect format. But I think more importantly, it's kind of like if I gave you bad directions, if I was like, oh, you know what, Sebastian, you should really eat at this restaurant. It's so good. It's like the best when you're traveling, you know, if you're going to Portland and you're traveling there, I've got the best restaurant for you to eat at when you're there. And you're like, all right, cool. What's the address? And I give you the wrong address. And then you get to Portland and you're like, oh, I'm excited to eat at this restaurant that Jose recommended. And you go to put the address in your GPS. And it's like, location not found. It's like, well, that's not helpful, right?
Yeah,
And
that
it's kind
makes
of that
sense,
same
yeah.
idea, right? Like, it's funny, Siri just heard me say that. And then my watch was like, I'm having trouble hearing you that, right? So like, it's kind of that same idea that like, if I write a messed up works cited page and then you're like, oh, this article sounds really good, I want to check this article out. And then you go and you look and I messed up the date or I messed up the publication format or something like that. Now you can't find the location of that article, right? So that's why it's important to have that there.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
And of course, there's also going to be a situation where people just want to see things in nice format.
Yeah.
Right. So let me share my screen and we're going to talk a little bit about, so there's no more questions about works cited. We're going to look at talking about conclusions a little bit. Oh, there we go. So for our essay, should we only be using Born a Crime, a teacher's TED Talk, and Blind Spot? If you want to use other sources, Tia, you're more than welcome to, but you don't have to. So for this essay, you have to use at least 2 of the 3 readings, right? Born a Crime, Blind Spot, and Danger of a Single Story. But if there's an additional reading that you'd like to use, if there's something that you think is relative to what your given is, you're more than welcome to use an additional source. And then the only thing is you would definitely make sure that you cite that additional source.
Yeah. And if you have a source that you're thinking about or like unsure about and you want to cross it with us, like go ahead and shoot me an email or come by on Wednesday. Or shoot us
and sometimes
an email. Yeah.
Sometimes there's those sources that we don't quite know what we have. We're like, is this an essay? Is this an article from an online journal? And then sources change too, right? Because like when I first started teaching, no one was citing tweets. Like that wasn't a regular thing. No one was like, hey, how do I cite a tweet? Now that's really common, right? And so MLA has adjusted and been like, here's the appropriate way to cite a tweet in your essay, or here's how we would cite, you know, 20 years ago, no one was talking about how to cite a YouTube video, and now it's super common, right? So it's like things change with time on what kind of sources get cited. So concluding paragraphs, really kind of thinking about how we close essays, right? We're switching gears a little bit here to think about like putting a conclusion together. And this is one of those things that we're going to continue to work on over the semester. So today I just want to kind of give like a rough overview of like putting conclusions together and kind of some things to think about as you start putting these together. So what do we already know about concluding paragraphs? Or maybe not concluding paragraphs, but what do we already know about just like conclusions in general? What should conclusions do? If you're concluding something, what should you do?
You kind of
Reviewing your thesis statement or your introduction.
Okay, yeah, so that's a part of a conclusion. Absolutely, you can review your thesis from your introduction. Good. What else should a good conclusion do? Think about maybe like a TV show or a movie, right? Like I was chatting with someone yesterday and we were talking about that TV show on Netflix, Squid Game, right? And I was telling them, oh, I just finished watching it. And then the person asked me like, did it have a good ending? And I was like, yeah, I like the ending. I thought the ending worked well. Like when we think about a good TV show or think about a good movie, what should a good ending to something do?
It should just
Provide
like end in
closure,
a,
right? I see that
just
Genevieve
end in a
wrote.
good way.
Yeah, end in a good
Conclusion.
way, right? Like Genevieve wrote, provide closure, right? Like kind of give you some sort of final sense of like, I feel like it's over, right? What else should it do? Maybe summarize points. Good, right? Like these are all things you should do. But like you're exactly right. Like I mean, usually when we get to that conclusion, like we want there to be some sense of closure. I want to know that it's over. I want to know that like the last episode of a TV series is there, or I want to know that like the end of the movie is there. You can kind of feel it, right? When you're watching a movie, sometimes you can get to that end and you're like, oh, this movie is getting ready to end. There's like 1 or 2 more minutes left because you can feel them kind of wrapping it up. And so providing closure, maybe kind of summarizing points. We hear about like rephrasing a thesis statement. Those are all things that we think about when we think about conclusions. So here's what we should kind of think about in general, a concluding paragraph should do, right? So like kind of generally, we want our conclusion to this idea of like restate or like revisit your thesis statement, right? And that's something that we want to do. And it doesn't have to be like word for word that you're going to say like exactly here's what my thesis said, but like revisit it, like remind the reader of what your argument was. I wrote down instead of like summarizing your main points, kind of synthesize your main points, like meaning bring your main points together. It doesn't have to be all of them because what you don't want to do is be like, here's my thesis, here's points 1, 2, and 3, and then here's, you know, kind of my final analysis. But more so than anything else, kind of think about like what big ideas from your essay do you think are really important for that reader to remember as they go into your conclusion, right? So it could be kind of like, you know, thinking about this idea of single story and how people are impacted. Maybe one of your big ideas was that it leads to violence against individuals who share that identity. And that's kind of that big point that you want someone to understand. So you can kind of blend together your main ideas or bring in some of your main ideas to remind your reader of what the big points of your argument were. Right? Next is like really like kind of make sure that you're showing your reader why your ideas should matter to them. Right? Like, so in other words, like, here is why these points are important. Here is what's significant about this idea. Here is like this, the whole point of like, here's the big ideas that I put in my essay, and here's why I want you to understand that they're important. And then finally, like this idea is like your conclusion should provide some sort of final sense of analysis or some sort of sense of closure for your reader, right? That reader should feel like I'm walking away and here's something that I'm taking away from my experience of having read this essay.
Yeah. I also like to think of it as we talked about like having a so what in your paragraphs, like having that point where you're talking about like, why does this matter to your overall argument? I think in the conclusion, you're doing the same thing, but for your entire argument. You say, I've argued all these things. Now, why should my reader care about this? Like, what's the bigger picture here? Like, if I'm talking about blind spot and like people's like unconscious biases and stuff, like ending of that statement with some kind of conclusion of like, we have a lot of problems that are being caused by this, and it's not going to change until we like recognize these biases, something that's going to give you a broader idea of like, this is why what I'm talking about is important.
Exactly right. It's just like your final chance. Like you've got like a few sentences left for your reader, and here's what you want them to take away from it, right? Here's the final thing that you want them to understand. So I think it makes sense, like when you're thinking about a conclusion or an essay structure, I kind of think about like, remember we talked about like the introduction is kind of like that funnel, right? Like the ideas start general, they get a little more specific, and then you hit the reader with the thesis statement. Your body paragraphs are very specific, right? So I kind of think about it's like your essay almost like having like an hourglass shape, right? So like your intro is general, your ideas get more specific in your thesis statement, and then your body paragraphs are very specific and you're kind of creating this argument. As you get out to the conclusion, it almost like opens back up again, right? And so that kind of bottom of that conclusion, that like final so what, that final analysis is like this idea where you want to take the reader and be like, now here's this idea that started with general. I gave you this specific argument. Now take these ideas and kind of go out and think about this as you're out in the world, right? Here's that kind of final takeaway that we want you to have. Here's what we want you kind of leave you thinking, right? So if I go back to that analogy of like why I thought that the ending of that Netflix show Squid Game was good, is it kind of left me thinking about things. It left me thinking about, you know, how people treat each other. It left me thinking about like how people are motivated by money, what, you know, what drives human behavior, right? And so like I walked out of it, I'm like, oh, that's kind of heavy. Like I'm leaving thinking about these things, right? These are kind of like those final moments of what I'm left with. So restating or rephrasing your thesis. Okay, here are the parts of thinking about what you should do in your conclusion. So you've just spent the entire body of your essay proving your thesis, right? That's what the whole point essay is. Like you've got this argument, it's your thesis statement, you spent the whole essay proving it. Now you just want to remind your reader of what your argument was. And a way to do that is you don't have to exactly copy the thesis statement over exactly as it is, but you could rephrase your thesis statement, meaning kind of like paraphrase yourself. Find another way of saying what you said in the beginning of your essay. So maybe in the beginning of your essay, if you create the argument that, you know, single stories are dangerous because they can create identities, they can ultimately lead to people being dehumanized, then maybe when you get to the conclusion, you can be like, because of single story identities, there's clear examples of people being dehumanized, right? And it's like, all you're doing is you're reinforcing this idea, you're reinforcing this argument that you created to your reader, again, to remind them in the conclusion, this is what I want you to understand by having read my essay. So kind of things to think about for creating this final analysis, right? And this is what Chris was talking about, like that final so what. I always think about like, what do I want my reader to like quote unquote walk away with, right? Like I'm done having this kind of conversation with my reader. I'm done having the reader read my essay. There's something that I want my reader to walk away with having read my essay, right? And maybe kind of think about that in situations like, imagine having a conversation with a friend. Maybe there's, you know, some advice that you want to give a friend, or maybe there's an issue that, you know, you and your friend are working through, or you have a relationship with somebody and it's like, you want to have like one of those moments where like, hey, let's sit down and have a conversation. That person's like, oh man, here it comes, right? Like, you know, sometimes those can be awkward, whatever. Like, I always think about that from like, you know, parenting, right? There's times where like, I need to like sit down and have a conversation with my kids about something, you know, like, I don't know, like talking with like, my daughter's like 11 now. And then like, there's all these conversations about like, she has a phone, but she wants like social media and things like that. And I'm like, nah, I'm not quite ready for us to go down that road yet, right? Like, so sometimes she gets frustrated with me because she's like, well, all my friends have TikTok and then my friends on Instagram and I don't have Instagram. And I'm like, all right. Right. And so I kind of think about like in the beginning, I lay down, hey, I think that, you know, for a kid 11 years old, there's too much on TikTok that exposes you to way too much mature content for the age that you are, right? That's my thesis statement. That's the argument that I want her to establish throughout the conversation that I have with her. Then I give her a bunch of reasons why, without going into too much detail, what all this content is that I don't want her viewing, but I give her a bunch of reasons why. Finally, when I get to that conclusion, there's that piece that I want her to walk away with, right? It's that kind of like, I want you to understand this when this conversation is over. And usually it's something like, you know what, sometimes it seems like it may not be fair, or that I'm enforcing some rule that you think is kind of strict. But at the end of the day, all I really care about is it's my job to protect you, and it's my job to do things that I think are in your best interest. You might not always love those things, but let's talk about them if you ever think I'm being unfair. And again, I'm only doing things that I think are in your best interest, and trying to protect you from, you know, dangerous content on the internet. Boom, like that's that final so what that I want to establish, right? think about like just maybe if you have a conversation with friends and you give a friend advice that might seem a little difficult to give, you could be like at the end of the conversation, be like, what? I'm your friend. I really care about you. And I just want to tell you this because, you know, again, you're somebody that really care about and I want the best for. Boom. Like that's that thing that you want them to leave the conversation having understood, right? Think about you are having a conversation with a boss and you're trying to get a raise, right? You establish your thesis. I think I should be compensated more for the job that I'm doing. You give all of the reasons why. And then in that final analysis, the thing that you want them to walk away with this conversation is like, look, I'm a good employee. I'm reliable. I've done all these things that I've talked about being able to do. And I really hope that you consider, you know, giving me more compensation for the work that I'm doing, right? It's like, I've got you for a few more seconds, a minute or two, a few more sentences. Please understand this before you walk away. Try to bring your reader kind of back full circle to your ideas you present in the introduction. So this is really helpful. Like if you have some sort of hook in the intro, maybe you tell a story, maybe you want to revisit that story, revisit that idea in your hook. And again, final so what? Final minute or two, give the reader something to walk away with, something to think about. So here's kind of some things to avoid when you're putting your conclusion together. Try not to introduce a new idea that needs support, right? Like that can be really tough. I mean, think about that in analogous to a TV show. Sometimes shows will do that where like the very end will introduce something brand new. Well, they're doing that because they're teasing a new season, or they're doing that because they're letting you know, hey, a sequel, like Marvel does that at the end of their movies, right? You finish after the credits, you hang out, and there's like, here's this completely new thing. And you're like, oh, okay, there's another movie getting ready to come. Unless you want to write a sequel to your essay, which I don't imagine everyone's super excited about wanting to have to do, like try not to do that when you're finishing an essay, because you're not wanting to provide your reader with like, here is a completely new idea at the end that I would have to support that I'm not going to support, right? So instead, try not to come up with like completely new ideas at the end of your intro. Try not to end by just repeating your thesis without any analysis. So you don't want to just be like, and here's what I argued, the end. It's like, again, here's kind of like some final takeaway that I want the reader to have. Try not to bring out ideas that are out of character with the rest of your tone of your essay. So for example, if you just get done talking about like how damaging stereotypes are, when you get to that conclusion, don't talk to me about how positive a stereotype can be, right? Or how it's creating single stories can be helpful in some situations. It's like, if your essay didn't focus on that, it's really hard. It'd be kind of like, you know, if I'm having that conversation with my daughter about like why she can't have TikTok or Snapchat or whatever it is that she wants, right? And it's like, but I get to the end and I'd be like, hey, but TikTok is pretty awesome because there's some funny stuff on there. And then I walk out of her room. She'd be like, well, you just got done telling me about how I shouldn't have it. And now you give me this little thing at the very end. It's complete opposite of what your argument is and about why it's good, right? So try not to come up with this new idea or something that's kind of out of character with the rest of the argument that you're creating.
Mm-hmm.
And then also don't provide additional evidence in the very end that's not something that you mentioned in your essay. So what you don't want to do is like create some, you know, here all of a sudden I'm going to use this additional source in my paper because it wasn't introduced in your essay. It's not part of the body of your essay. And it can be a little bit confusing to your reader to bring up something kind of completely new or a new source that wasn't brought up earlier in the paper. Any questions at all about like maybe kind of putting concluding paragraphs together or some strategies for that? And again, Chris is going to have some time on Wednesday when he's doing his workshop. So as you're working through this week and you're putting your conclusion together or you're building your essay, definitely stop by on Wednesday. And that's one of the places that you can workshop is looking at conclusion.
I would say one other thing about conclusions is this isn't always the thing to do because sometimes you're dealing with problems that are like really complex. But if you're going through your research and there's something about like, here's things we can do about whatever issue you're talking about, that's a great thing to end your conclusion with. Like I think about if you're watching a documentary, what's some things you see at the end of a documentary sometimes is like, go here if you want to get involved, or do these things if you want to help out this problem. Like that's a great way to end your conclusion, because it not only is it speaking to the importance of the problem, but it's speaking directly to your reader and like, and here's the next things we can do that's going to avoid whatever thing I'm talking about. And again, sometimes that's not always super clear. of like when you're dealing with big complex problems. But if you found something that's like, here's something we can do, that's a great thing to bring up.
Yeah, it's like that call to action in the end, right? It's like
Yeah.
kind of giving your reader like that's that final analysis. Like what I want you to do is here, check this out, or start thinking about, and maybe it's like something as simple as like kind of thinking about the now that we know that there's potential, if you're writing about like problems with creating single stories, then maybe the kind of the call to action is like think about what you do, think about situations that your reader is in, right? A DJ does that really well. It's like she calls herself out. She's like, here's situations where I've created single stories, and here's what was wrong with me doing that. And it's like she like her kind of call to action in the end is like really think about those moments that we ourselves find when we're creating these stereotypes or these biases towards people, that like here's what the problem is with doing that. Cool. So as you're working this week, I'll have some office hours now if anyone has any questions and needs to stick around and ask. Then as you're working this week, remember Chris has his workshop on Wednesday with the information for that is in the announcements. And then please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. You can text us, email, anything like that, and we're available to answer those as you're working.
Yep.